Ready to go!
You're listening to By Land and by Sea, powered by the Maritime Professor. The Maritime Commission has a new chair, and when leadership changes at a competition authority agency, the implications obviously reach far beyond Washington. Because how the chair thinks and what the chair prioritizes can shape how the agency operates. Of course it does. Today we're stepping back from the headlines to talk about the person now helping guide that direction. Hi, welcome back to By Land and by Sea, an attorney breaking down the week in supply chain, presented by the Maritime Professor. That's me. I'm Lauren Began, founder of the Maritime Professor, former FMC International Affairs attorney, and founder of Squall Strategies. By Land and by Sea is your go-to resource for navigating the regulatory side of global ocean shipping. And me? I'm your favorite maritime attorney. As always, this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. There is no attorney-client privilege created by this video or this podcast. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. So now, instead of breaking down policy developments this week, we're going to shift our focus a bit on leadership. New leadership, the newest leadership. Of course, I'm talking about the freshly appointed chair of the Federal Maritime Commission. And if you listen to this podcast, you already know her name. Joining me today is the new FMC chairman, Laura DiBella. And I couldn't be more thrilled with her stepping into this role at such a pivotal time. Now, as I've gotten to know her, I've become increasingly confident that her background in business and economic development lends itself so well to leading a competition authority agency like the FMC. She understands how businesses operate. She understands how economic policy affects real companies and real jobs, and how some of the regulations can affect all of that. And that expertise matters when you're overseeing the fair and competitive ocean transportation system network. And as you'll hear in this conversation, she's focused on helping U.S. shippers, both importers and exporters, and ultimately the U.S. consumer too. That business lens will serve the commission well as she grows into this leadership role. Now, my goal in this conversation was simple. I wanted you to get to know Chairman DiBella, not just the title, but a little bit of who she is, and perhaps maybe a snapshot of how she approaches problems. I also want you to come away today with a clearer sense of her early priorities and how she's already beginning to chart the course for the commission as she finds her footing in this role. And as I always say, when you understand the rules, you make better decisions. But in moments like this, understanding the leadership helps give you context for how challenges will be approached and how priorities will take shape within the agency. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Chairman DiBella. Today's episode is a little different. We're stepping away from the weekly headlines and focusing on leadership. Joining me is the newly designated chairman of the Federal Maritime Commission, Chairman Laura DiBella. She was nominated in September 2025, confirmed by the Senate in December, and sworn in January 2026. And only, I think it was 22 days later, designated as chairman shortly thereafter. Before joining the commission, she served as Florida's first female Secretary of Commerce, led statewide economic development efforts, served as port director of the Port of Fernandina Ocean Highway and Port Authority, and was the first full-time executive director for the Florida Harbor Pilots Association. Good. This is all great. Today, I want you to actually get to know her, though. Not just the title, but the person behind the title, the perspective, and how she's thinking about leading the commission at this moment. So, Chairman DiBella, thank you for being here and welcome.
I appreciate it, Lauren. I'm honored to be here, especially with you. So,
well, thank you.
Knowing what you know. So, yes, thank you.
Well, thank you. Thanks so much for being here. So, like I said, I wanted to kind of start at the beginning. So, you earned your degree in human resource management with a concentration in business administration and management from the University of Florida, which is great, right? You're from Florida. And you know what really speaks to me about that combination is that it sits at the intersection of people and business. So talk to me a little bit about that. What were you hoping to be when you grew up? And what were some of those decisions you made as you really started your career?
Wow. Well, to be very transparent, I had switched my degrees so many times when I was in college, to the point that the tracking system really started to take shape, and my counselor at the time was like, you have to pick something. And like because we're not going to keep you here for 7 years like most people were. That was when they were really tightening up, the degrees time. So So I still got out in 4 years, but I like to say I'm a compilation of many degrees, and that's where HR kind of fell into
Mhm.
at that point, because I had taken so much business and so much communications, and I wanted to be an engineer when I first started college, and then I went into communications, and then landed in business and HR. So I did not plan to really enter into that world, but it was kind of funny that that's ultimately where I did land, because part of the HR degree was it was very nascent at the time, and there was a huge component of we shared courses with community development and
Okay.
social workers, so which had everything to do with family and community building,
Mhm.
and nurturing the familial environment and the community environment to allow the people of that community to flourish, which in essence is economic development, like the foundational principles of economic development in many ways, from a workforce and just quality of life standpoint. So I look fondly upon that time and kind of getting backed into that degree, because it it gave me all of the skills needed to understand business, but at the same time it helped me develop the real soft skills that give you the edge in business too.
Yeah.
So and ultimately understand what is important to making a community grow.
Yeah.
So that's how it kind of all came about. And then I went into real estate right away after college. It was a interesting time, the early 2000s. The real estate market was starting to go like this, and it was a suggestion by my father, and I willingly did it just as a part-time thing, and it turned into a full-time job. And then before I knew it, I was doing real estate for one of the largest healthcare providers in the nation, which was Hospital Corporation of America. So they had me bouncing all over the state and doing, bird dogging for land and for hospital facilities. Which, if I don't expect your participants here to know, but hospitals are as retail as, like, say, a big box store or a grocery store or a bank or something like that. So we were competing with all those entities in like far off places in Florida, where there was mainly farmland and like where like the growth of community was going. So that was really like my entree into economic development. And then I was recruited into economic development to a very rural town that was on the cusp of very transformative change, and I was asked to kind of be to lead that change and recruit business to that area. And it was a phenomenal opportunity that ultimately brought me to where I am today, because that's where I landed, got
Mhm.
voluntold basically to be a port
Yeah.
director. And then I got pulled into the harbor pilots, and then the Secretary of Commerce. And then, now I'm here. So
Oh, that's perfect.
it's a very long-winded answer to your question, but
No, that's
I
perfect.
think the world does go full circle. Like,
Mhm.
somehow, some way, the universe put me into that HR degree, and it has tremendously worked out for me.
Well, and I love what you said, how the approach of, economies are people, right? I mean, that's it. At some point it feels a little black and white. It feels a little kind of numbers on a piece of paper. But I love that what you just said of like, but it was the people, right? I mean, and that was the intersection of your degree anyways. I was the same. I had a lot of minors, almost minors here and there. Mostly just means you took a lot of classes, kind of followed your interest. Yeah, same
Yeah.
thing. Which is good. Actually, it means that you can multitask and you have, you pursue passions, all that good stuff.
Yeah.
But I really like what you said there about, it really is kind of all about the people. And so as it tells me a lot about you in general, that as you're making decisions, you're not going to do it in a vacuum. You're going to do it with kind of people in mind, the kind of overall picture, the total picture, and not just, you know, big bad businesses or whatever, but the whole kind of taking it all into account. Sometimes you got to make tough decisions. That's, a given, but yeah, I mean, I like that. That's kind of what your starting point on that.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you started, into the career path, obviously you were going into real estate and going into the hospital system. Did you ever, I mean, think that you were going to be moving over into public service, or, you went into the commerce side of things right off the bat and then kind of went over into maritime? Was that something that you were seeking out, was the public service side, or is that something that kind of evolved as the opportunities presented themselves?
No, it definitely evolved. Definitely evolved. It wasn't anything I ever sought out. I've always, but however, looking back, when I was in grade school, I've always loved government. Always, like I've
Mhm.
always loved, and I was participant in student government. I think I was president of student government when I was in high school. So
Mhm.
I've always loved governance and the public service aspect, and talking about policy and just being being at that forefront. Like I love history. Like that was definitely one of my favorite subjects in school. So it was certainly a strong suit. So it's no surprise to me that ultimately it found me because I gravitated towards it my entire life.
Yeah, I have a feeling we would have been friends in college, actually. I think we probably would have done all the governance classes and all of that
Yeah,
together.
yeah, for
Well, so
sure.
then you went on to become Florida's first female Secretary of Commerce in 2023, right? And I'm kind of skipping around here, but
Mhm.
what did that role teach you about how policy decisions actually do play out for the businesses on the ground? You said that you keep the human element involved in it, but what a giant role and what a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, it's that was an amazing experience. It really from start to finish, and it was a lot. I mean, it really was a lot. But thankfully, I had the foundation from when I was doing local economic development to the ability to just take that a step further. To amplify it to a higher level. And I feel like I was a better secretary, of the state, Secretary of Commerce for the state, because I truly understood the impacts of those policies at the ground level, and how business moves and operates into decisions that are made all the way down to the last mile when it comes to trucks, the need for rail extensions, at port, at manufacturing facilities, from the port operations and all of those things. But it was wonderful to have that wider lens, and but at the same time being able to craft policy that will have a direct effect, a direct positive effect at the local level. Um, One thing I think people don't realize is just how much comes at you when you're secretary. You know what I
I
mean?
can
You
imagine.
are, you are. I was explaining it to actually one of my counterparts here at work the other day. It was a very very demanding job, more so than anybody realizes, because you are responsible for the agency. You're running an arm of government first and foremost, and that's often what people forget. Like, yeah, you wear the title and that means you're doing some business recruitment, you're handling all sorts of things, but you're also running an agency at the same time, so you need to make sure that your people are happy. So that's first and foremost. Same thing with here at the FMC, is make sure that the staff is happy and performing, so that you can do your job. And at the same time, you're wearing another hat or multiple hats in my case, because we had so much under the Enterprise Florida umbrella, which was the public-private partnership that was our economic development arm of the state, that involved talking to businesses, managing the businesses in the state, dealing with the workforce, dealing with all of the components that surrounded the entire economic development commerce wheel. So there was not a minute that I had free, ever, not even on the weekends. And I'm not complaining. I mean, but it is a hard charging job. It definitely
Mhm.
has a shelf life. It takes some thick skin to do that job, and I appreciated every moment of it, and I loved it. It was a fabulous job,
Oh,
at a great time in Florida. Florida was, on its way, like it was on its way up. We were coming out of COVID and um, shut down. And I mean, I had businesses just, I was on the phone with some of the most biggest names in the world almost every day, saying to me, we're not considering coming to Florida. We're coming to Florida. So figure it out, be prepared. This is what we're going to do. And just, and I hang up the phone. I'm just like, oh my gosh, like is this for real? Like, I'm not even selling. Like, I'm just saying, okay, great, see you soon, goodbye. It made the sales process really easy because the timing was really good. And we
Yeah.
had wonderful policies in place. So I will say till the very end, it was the hardest job, but the most rewarding job I will ever have. Probably until now. So
Yeah, right. Maybe, perhaps. That's right. Well, it certainly prepared you. That's for sure. And I was going to say, it's not that any state is a sleepy state, but a state that is so forefront of national politics, especially in the past 5 years, for you to be there 3 years ago, right? I mean, not even less than 3 years ago, during that 2023 period. I mean, there was a lot going on then, anyways, right? I mean, it feels like COVID was so long ago, but so much has happened in that was right a year or two after things were kind of really getting going. And plus it was Florida during that time, which is also kind of a booming area. So, yeah, I can only imagine that must have been just such a wild ride, but also really gave you such a unique perspective on how to build efficiently and effectively, and also make sure that, like you said, everybody's kind of taken care of in your staff, because that much pressure can be difficult for a staff to take on. And so I've certainly felt that before, where being on as part of the staff team, having strong leadership and leadership that actually takes the experience into consideration for everybody, I think is such an important piece, and actually why the FMC has been successful for the past at least 10 years or so. I think that having strong leadership is fantastic. But before you were at Secretary of Commerce, but before you were in that role, you were, as you kind of said, you were over at the Port Director at Puerto Fernandina, Ocean Highway and Port Authority. So that was in 2017. And you actually kind of already talked about how, ports and logistics and infrastructure were really kind of, you brought that into your Secretary of Commerce position. But what about that role is really going to help you, I think, succeed going forward, right? I mean, it was a time where in 2017 it was pre-COVID, but it was still a difficult time because there was congestion starting to happen at some of the ports around the country. Obviously, you were in the Florida world, but you also probably got exposure to some of your neighboring ports in the Florida community. So, talk to me a little bit more about that role.
Yeah. So that's where you really learn, you learn how marketing can help you in the best way possible. There was around that time, and still goes on today, there was a lot of consolidation, especially on the containerization front. So Puerto Fernandina, is so small. We were such a little port, 19 acres in total. We were small but mighty. We had no overhead obstructions. We had a very short short channel. Like, we had our own little world. So we had a small little mixed port. Generally paper products, and some project cargo and so on and so forth. So we had one line that went to Bermuda, it was just a container. That was our container business. But we were sandwiched in between Jacksport to our south, Brunswick to our north, and then Savannah just north of that. And Brunswick was just starting to really pivot and redirect their operations towards cars, towards vehicles. So they were offloading their forest products business. And here I am, and I'm like, bring it to me. Like, we'll take it. We'll take your scraps all day long. And I was saying the same thing to Jacksport. I'm like, please, just give us whatever you got. Like, I'm happy to take this marginal business, shall we call it, which is not marginal. It's wonderful business. I'll take that off your hands all day long. We'll celebrate that. You want to be more containerized, go for it. We'll take that, that bulk type of capacity and celebrate it all day long. So that was the fun part of my job, was just kind of reminding the others, be like, hey, we're here. We're here. We let us be your relief valve, as you continue to expand in your own unique ways. So at the same time, we tried to, this was right before I left the port and moved to the harbor pilots. We tried to do we applied, and we were awarded the Marine Highway designation. So which ultimately gave us the route from, it was Fernandina to Charleston, and we were going to barge containers and send them up to Charleston, kind of an on demand to help our forest products business side, because of the links to China. So it was either Charleston or Savannah was the thought process there. So yeah, we were very ambitious, but we did our own little thing, and it taught me a lot. But the biggest lesson in all of that is that those small ports are really important.
Yeah, well,
They can't be overlooked. They have a role, and they have
that's
a
right.
very big role. And it makes me sad that they don't get the love that they receive.
But
Mm.
I think that's so. There's a few things that I think are really important. I love that you had exposure to bulk and to project cargo, because containerized cargo it's not the easy side, but it is kind of like the more approachable, the more kind of systemic, right? I mean, liner shipping, right? Routine trade routes. That's kind of like there's some reliability to it, but not many people actually understand, and myself included. I still have to learn on the bulk and the project side. I mean, worked at the Port of Boston for a little bit, so I got to see a little bit. I mean, not the bulk, but the some of the project cargo, but container ports. So that's kind of what I knew. But to have that exposure and to seek that out and to find ways of kind of partnering with other ports around the area, that's something that it's an idea that keeps kind of coming up. This coastwise trade for like barges that help move, and the maritime highways, the something that MARAD works heavily on and wants to try to
Mhm.
kind of promote. But especially for some of our larger ports, having that be an option where then it can help alleviate some of that, traffic that's surrounding some of those large ports. But that's fantastic that you have exposure, because I think that will be probably something that will continue to grow as a conversation piece as the U.S. continues to kind of look at ports strategically. As you know, right, the FMC is the competition authority. So I think anytime the ports start working together a little bit too much, right, that'll be now your new role of knowing, hey guys, careful. But on the other hand, I think that there are partnerships. I mean, that's part of what those agreements filed at the FMC are all about, these working cooperative agreements to help promote and facilitate, fair partnerships, right? That are done in the light and in the right way. But I love that you kind of did that. You helped build some of those relationships among ports. And so while you're still competitors, you're still working toward a larger goal collectively, right? And in this new world of maritime dominance, U.S. maritime dominance and the promotion of maritime. Also, the U.S. flag fleet that you were probably working with in that area, and when you were doing the coastwide trade. I think all of that exposure, while maybe not exactly FMC, will give you such a fantastic context as you work with the global ocean shipping world and as you work with all of these, foreign ocean carriers, and how the U.S. presence may or may not grow. Hopefully it grows, right? I mean, we kind of want to get back to a world where we have U.S. flag as a competitor out there again, but in a large scale, right? They certainly are. We have fantastic U.S. flag. But yeah, I think that that's all really good exposure and really kind of gives you a fantastic, um, more than glimpse. I mean, you understood it. You were in the port and you saw the larger ports around you, but then also how you could be nimble and creative and strategic and do it all kind of right in the world. So I love to see somebody with any maritime experience, let alone great maritime experience, come into the FMC.
Yeah, yeah. I'm
Well, and
grateful. I'm grateful. I had to scrap, and
good.
I understand the fight, that's at the ground
Mhm.
level for sure.
Well, and that's right about maritime anyways. I mean, I always say that this is an industry of passion, right? And so it's one thing to kind of come into it, it's another to be in it and live in it and thrive in it, right? And so it you also get kind of like gumption from the maritime industry. And honestly, when you said that you were the first executive director of the Florida Harbor Pilots Association, there is no better way to get gumption and really understand what it's like for mariners. I mean, you are seeing vessels coming in and out because the pilots are the first ones to see these large vessels. That having that role of executive director in that position really tells me, I think, a lot about it. Shows that you not only were exposed to the business side of it all, but you were truly, and right, this business people theme that we have going here, you were exposed and helped the people side of it. And it's such an interesting time that you were there, right? It was November 2019 to July 2022. I mean, that was COVID. And so, it was a really difficult time for mariners because they really couldn't get off their vessels and this and that. And they didn't have, it was hard for them to get, if they were getting two shots or whatever. It was just hard for logistically for them to kind of be accepted back into society during that time. And And during that time, you were working with the pilots who were meeting them. So beyond that, though, it was a very operational vantage point, the supply chain. So talk to me a little bit about that, working with the pilots. How did that kind of expose you to the risk, the safety, the movement of commerce, right? Being a harbor pilot is an incredibly dangerous position anyways. I mean, we won't even get into the dangerousness of these ladders. I mean, it's incredible. But yeah, what was it like during that time?
It was smooth and beautiful for like
Yeah, so
for
easy.
3 months, and then the world just collapsed. So when you think about where you think about the situation in Florida. So let me back up. So February, March 2020, 2020. I was with them for, 3.5 months or so. All of a sudden, everything shuts down. And then, actually, before that, let me back up. Harbor pilots in Florida, and I'm only speaking of Florida, the harbor pilotage, the 24 states, in the United States that deal with pilotage handle it all differently. So I'm only speaking to how Florida deals with pilotage. But pilotage in Florida is a completely private industry, even though they perform an absolutely public service, bringing the vessels in and out of the seaports, foreign flag and at times U.S. flag. So I think it was 7 feet of draft. So that's what Florida law required, Florida statute. So so with that, the pilots are paid essentially a commission, to put it simply, based on the length of beam, and maybe other factors depending on the port, that on the gross tonnage, of a vessel that they would bring in and out of the seaport. So fast forward to when everything shut down in that March time period. Florida remains the home, and Galveston is duking it out, and for position number 3, if they haven't taken it already. 3 largest cruise ports in the world: Miami, Canaveral. Those 2 are duking it out round. I think right now it's Canaveral. So it's Canaveral, Miami, and Port Everglades. So when you take away that amount of vessel activity for a year and a half, nearly, the financial carnage that occurred was immense. It went from, there are some seaports, to break it all down. We had Key West was 98% cruise, closed for a year and a half, nearly. Canaveral, 85% cruise. Again, that time period, you had Miami was about 65% cruise. Port Everglades was 35% cruise, almost 40% cruise. Palm Beach, people don't realize Palm Beach, you take away their cruise business, that affected them very bad. And then I could keep going down. Jacksonville had, under 10, just about 10%, Tampa about 10%, so, right around those numbers. It hit the industry very, very, very hard, them extremely hard. That was number one. So it hit them in the pocket. So I had to put my economic developer hat on and seek out every single disaster loan there was possible to pretty much keep them afloat, because there was so much, to use a pun, there was so many issues at the state level that, you couldn't get anybody's attention saying, hey, if these guys and gals don't get paid, you understand your ships aren't moving, So I say this very often, like, PPP loans and disaster loans are what kept our ports open in the state of Florida for about a year, while the cruise activity, generally kept, slowly but surely came back. And I was screaming like to high heaven during that time to get the cruise ships back sailing, because the cruise ship activity was essentially subsidizing the cargo activity. The cargo activity still had to move. So that there was, so we had harbor pilots that were basically working without pay for many, many, many months, because it's not like they could just stop and the pilot vessels could not, run. They had to run. They had to move. So we had to get really, really creative, very, very fast. And I give them all the credit in the world, because not one of them said, I'm not getting paid, and therefore I'm not going to work. So for that reason, my heart goes out to them, because they suffered, and they suffered a lot. They had to sell their homes, their cars, their lives got completely upended. But we continue to have cargo come in and out of the seaports, while the cruise industry slowly got back up and running. So that was part one. That's the financial side. The health side was really interesting in the beginning as well, because nobody knew what was going on. So if you recall what, we had the cruise ships with, some dead bodies on board, and, which is not an uncommon thing. A lot of people don't realize, that there unfortunately are, people pass away while they're on a cruise ship. But it was taken to a new level during the early times of the pandemic, because because of the possibility that they had passed because of COVID, but then also the fact that the pilots, as you had already so well said, they're the first intercept on the water. So how do we protect the pilot from this unknown disease that is allegedly all over this ship? And there was no protocol in place. Like, how do we, how do they dress? What should they wear? How do they sanitize? Put bleach and all. Did they carry a bottle of bleach with them and just throw it all over the place? So we had them in Tyvek suits and, gas masks and everything. I mean, this just conversation saying this is the best way to go about it. They were in full dress, going on to boarding those ships and then bringing them in. So it was a really, really scary time for them, because we just didn't know. And again, it's not like they could be like, I refuse. And none refused. They did their job, and they adapted to, whatever information we knew at the time, and did it well. So it was wild. I could talk to you for hours about that time period, but it was really wild, dealing with the health crisis for starters, to make sure that they're safe. And then, to take that a step further, I'm going to get even long-winded. If any of them had tested positive for COVID, they were out of rotation. So that caused an even bigger problem, because it's not like we could pull a pilot from another station in the state, because if an entire pilot fleet got sick. So it was one thing after another. It was wild. It was wild. Yeah. But we got through it.
Yeah, I mean, talk about a challenging time for sure. And the other silver lining, as we're kind of building, your understanding of the industry.
Yeah.
Cruise, right? I mean, I didn't even think of that. Of course, Florida and cruising. I mean, to have the exposure there. I mean, so Coast Guard has the safety element of cruise, but FMC has probably the only teeny tiny little commercial side of regulatory authority over cruise that's out there. And so former Chairman Sola was very interested in cruise, right? He had an economic study that actually it was right after COVID or right during that time where the FMC was looking at the economic impact of cruising just around an area anyways. And one of the things I believe he was, I think he was on record saying this, that there was an increase in, there continues to be, right, an increase in China being interested in the cruising world. And so I think that's where the FMC's authority will probably stay curious because the same way that, the international competition and something that the FMC monitors as a competition authority might be something that now kind of gets superimposed into the cruise world as, just the kind of basic fairness of the market. So cruising, it feels like kind of self-regulate. I mean, I don't want to say totally self-regulates, but there's a fair amount of self-regulation anytime you have that really consumer-facing side of things. It kind of corrects because the public wants it to and needs it to and, speaks up. Whereas I feel like on the lesser known side, like cargo container movements, right? Nobody really knew where all the stuff was coming from. They just knew it was arriving at the ports. That's where the FMC really, really shines. But so all of this is kind of building, right, into now the commission, right? Now you're here, you're at the commission. It's such a wonderful place to work because I think because of that too, it has such a deep bench of career professionals and politicals that have institutional expertise that's there both at the political level and at the staff level. And I'm interesting to hear, what are one or two of the areas that you're kind of most interested to dive into. Well, we'll get to maybe your priorities in a minute, but as you were first kind of hearing about the FMC, and obviously you were probably already aware of it from all of your maritime experience, although some of the most seasoned maritime people have maybe never even heard of the FMC. So, so that's fine too. But what were some of the things that, as you were learning more about the FMC, that kind of caught your attention?
I appreciate I appreciate the fact that the FMC is just all about, it's all about in the end the consumer. And I've said this in pretty much every single interview that I've had since I've started this job. It was, and I can't take credit for the, the moniker, but I 100% agree with it. Like we are a consumer protection agency. We care about the cargo. We care about the U.S. shipper and the U.S. shipper's bottom line and helping that person out. So once again, going back to like the theme of this, interview, it's all about people. It's all about the people and how are we helping the people. So it's that's what's most attractive about me. I mean, there's certainly I enjoy talking about infrastructure. I enjoy the tangible aspects of supporting the U.S. shipper. But what I really care about is how can we help their bottom line in the best way possible, and that's what ultimately we do here, through enforcement and in policy making. So, working collaboratively with other agencies and of course the industry itself. So it's very cross functional and cross directional and but in the end at the heart of the matter is the U.S. consumer and how we can support them. What I also really appreciate about the FMC more and more that I did not realize until I've come into it, and it's only really taken shape in, well, I've only been here for 6 weeks. I mean, so just about so the past couple of weeks in the 6 weeks here, but is that and I've believed this, and I used to say it when I was Secretary of Commerce, just you are. Without maritime economic development would not exist. And I mean it wholeheartedly. And I know many in the industry, you would also agree, it's just, there's not enough planes, trains, or trucks to support anything that's going by water. And if you don't make maritime the focus of your conversation, rather than an afterthought, you are looking at things completely the wrong way. So I appreciate the fact and the direction that the FMC has been going over the past couple of years, in really making maritime the focal point of the conversation. And geopolitics the way they are, and just the madness that has been on the high seas over the past handful of years has pretty much put this agency front and center in that regard. So I feel very lucky. I feel like I'm in like the right place at the right time with what I love.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and given your economic background, I mean, as soon as you were nominated, I was like, that makes so much sense. That's where the FMC needs to be, is with really deep economic understanding, because, building on what former Chairman Sola was doing, was he wasn't afraid to use the authorities. The FMC, I think, for a very long time, independent regulatory agency, was kind of just doing a really good job of keeping things, moving. But when Sola came along, it was perhaps controversial in the kind of FMC world, but he was using some of these international authorities that the FMC has, the Foreign Shipping Practices Act, Section 19, to really kind of expand the conversation, not expand the authority, because it was always there. It just really hadn't been used because, I mean, one, there's so much going on, right? There's only 120-ish people, give or take 15 or 20 anytime, down to 99, I think, recent years anyways. So there's not a lot of people at the FMC anyway. So it's already a giant ask to have this much authority and this much purview to be the economic, competition authority for billions, if not trillions, of international commerce. And then on top of that, just to keep doing a great job at all of the service contract monitoring, the agreements filings, and then all of the complaints that come through, the judicial aspect of the FMC. But then, like you're saying, I mean, to have geopolitics be part of it, maritime security is national security, and it kind of always has been. It was, if you ruled the seas, you ruled the world forever. And then it became, then we had airplanes and we had all the other things. But it really still kind of remained in that during COVID, this was a probably lesser remembered, maybe even lesser known, but given your experience with the pilots and the ports, you probably knew this. Maritime workers were not included in the national essential employee list right off the bat. It had to be fixed. And just that alone, I mean, the maritime community was like, yeah, of course. Like, it wasn't even like a surprise. It was just like, yeah, of course you forgot. It just always, when you deal with multimodal, it's always the weird little side conversation instead of one of the major modes. I mean, even I won't necessarily call out, but there still continue to be a few national transportation groups and or national transportation advisory committees that don't have maritime. I mean, even today that I'll make my little LinkedIn comment and be like, you forgot maritime. If that's transportation, you forgot the biggest one. But I mean, and I try not to be too much of a pain there, but it's so true. And I think that that's so important. And so having your background in maritime and your understanding of the economics of it all to help drive that conversation is so key because the way that we've approached maritime for a very long time is kind of from a military perspective, but that's also why we are where we are because the military is fantastic, wonderful, it should be supported, but there needs to be for this, US perspective and apologies, we're kind of getting into MARAD territory here, but there needs to also be a competition element to it. And that's where the FMC should remain part of that conversation. MARAD is the promotion of the US flag fleet, but the FMC maintains the competition fairness throughout. And so you're kind of building the runway for MARAD to take off. And so working together is really going to be crucial because you can build all the ships you want. If they don't have anything to do, they're going to be useless to you in a few years, right? And so,
Right.
kind of fostering that economic development on the maritime side, while that may or may not be part of the FMC's direct purview, it is for the better of the U.S. importer, exporter, and U.S. consumer, just like you're saying, the shippers. And that's the economic engine that will keep these vessels sailing and really has been the missing piece to why this really hasn't been successful for a while. One of the missing pieces.
Yeah. Yeah. Agree 100%. So like rising tides float all boats. So if
That's right.
we correct that one area, not correct that one area, but we continue to support that one area, it's only going to grow. So
That's right.
yeah.
Well, so now, okay, so since I have you, I do kind of want to ask,
Yeah.
how did you find out you were being nominated? When did you, you can share as much or as little of the story as you want. What was that like to kind of hear, oh my gosh, okay, yeah, all right, FMC. And then recently, how did you find out that you were going to be designated as chairman? Because you were already there and it was kind of this like, okay, when are we going to find out who's going to be chair? What's going on here?
Well, the how the position came about, it came to me actually in like three different ways, which is, not to get all, hokey on you, but I was just like, this is happening. And I was like, this is happening whether I want it or not. Like the universe is pushing me towards this, this is what's next in my life. It was like a punch in the gut because I was living in sunny South Florida and I was, happy in with my job at Adams and Rees. But I just felt like something was coming and a business contact from when I was with the Harbor Pilots that I had met just casually at an event, and kept in touch with over the years, reached out to me and said, first of all, it was a funny phone call in a way because he's like, I've been trying to get a hold of you for months. And I was like, what do you mean you've been trying to get a hold of me for months? And he was calling my state number, which obviously I didn't have anymore because I was no longer with the state. You have two phones like you do in every government. But anyways, ultimately he found me. And he said, I heard that you were interested in the FMC position. And I was like, well, yes. I had a conversation with Bill Doyle, former commissioner, a couple months prior to that. And Bill Doyle had actually turned me on to the FMC. I did not think that I was, up to snuff to be part of the FMC. I thought I maybe was not qualified enough. But Bill gave me that assurance. He goes, oh, yes, you are. And I said, oh, okay, if you say so, then let's do it. And then the more I read about it, I was like, well, maybe he's right. So anyways, but that conversation kind of stayed where it was. And I met a few people, through Bill and started to get connected here in DC. But that other, that other business contact that I had, said, I will help you, and ultimately got me in front of the presidential personnel office, and ended up with that interview that ultimately led to the nomination. Lou Sola also put in I have to give him credit as well. He put a very good word in for me too, because I knew Lou, former Commission Chairman Sola, when he was a board of pilot commissioner when as I was coming in with the Harper pilots. He was starting with the FMC, so we kind of crossed paths, but I knew him when he was a commissioner. So he was definitely very, very supportive in this as well. So like I said, it came at me three independent ways. This opportunity came to me, and I feel very lucky. Like I said, it was the process in getting nominated was probably the easy part. Getting to confirmation is the hardest part. But it's so worth it. It's so worth it. The FBI background checks, and then the working with the Senate majority and the minority, and, just all of the politics that's involved in there. But I'd like to say everybody was very gracious. Both sides were extremely gracious. I think it's hard to punch holes through experience. And it was clear that I was being considered for this. I would like to say because of my experience. Mm-hmm. So they were all very nice to me.
Well, you had maritime and you had economics. It's hard to say you shouldn't go to a maritime economics agency, right?
Yeah. So it's been great. And then, and considerably short compared to other nominees, presidential nominees, from start to finish, it was 4 months. Mm-hmm. So, relatively speaking, that's, I got lucky. I got lucky there. There was other, nominees that were waiting for nearly a year to get confirmed. So I feel lucky. So I got my stuff together and moved myself to DC, and here I am.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And so, growing into the chairman role, I mean, it was quick. I mean, it was one of the fastest, I think, that I've ever heard of, from when you actually stepped foot into the FMC at all. That were you kind of given any hints maybe leading up to it? I mean, like I said, the maritime economics for a maritime economic agency lined up to me. So I actually early on I thought, okay, well maybe they're positioning Commissioner DiBella to be Chairman DiBella, but who knew, right? But were you given any kind of signals that perhaps, or was it totally out of the blue?
No, it definitely wasn't out of the blue, because these are responsibilities that are inherent within the chairman role, as it relates to the agency. Shall we say the less sexy part? Everybody sees the sexy part when you're out there, and so on and so forth. The less sexy part, which means handling the agency and doing what is needed to support the people. Was a discussion that needed to be had beforehand. And one that I willingly accept. And I think that conversation happened very early on. And I never counted my chickens, at any moment, because, after all, I'm not the only one. There's, 4 other commissioners, ultimately, with when Bob's on board that could easily have that title. So I wasn't sure if I was the only one having that conversation, but I had a feeling. Based on a few things. So I was ready.
Okay, good. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's great, because I think when Chairman Sola became chairman, I remember him saying that it was it was a total surprise. And so you never know how much leadway or headway, or if anybody's given kind of any hints, but that's fantastic. And you mentioned Bob, so for the listeners, so Robert Harvey, he is awaiting his confirmation. He has been nominated. He was nominated around the same time as you.
Yes, exactly same time.
Yeah, there was just a paperwork, and with the nomination kind of clumps you were in, and for whatever reason his name wasn't yet. But yeah, it feels like it's just a matter of time for him to be installed, and then we'll be full power at the FMC. All 5 commissioners will be in their positions, and then you can really get cooking. So now that you're in the chairman role, and granted it's only been like a minute, right? It hasn't been very long at all. So I don't want to put you too much on the spot, but it is a big responsibility leading this agency that is in charge of, all of the fairness and competition authority of global ocean shipping. But then, as you said, right, it is really protecting and fostering the U.S. importer, exporter, and U.S. consumer. You saw the ports and you saw all of that, how it all worked in. How does all of your experience and where, if you can already, I mean, what are some of the things that the directions that you maybe want to take the FMC? And I think some of the most successful chairmen that we've had have developed strong ideas of where they're going. But importantly, I kind of couch that with developed, right? You're kind of still getting your feet wet and where you want to go. But yeah, talk a little bit about the priorities that you have as in your new chairmanship role.
Sure. Well, first priority more than anything, which we've talked about a few times here, is obviously taking care of the house. If staff is not supported, then they're not ultimately able to do the most important job in the world, in my opinion. So support them. But I really enjoy and see the direction through which this agency has gone over the past couple of years, and the more global outreach, global interface as it relates to the U.S. shipper, taking, as the next chapter in the FMC. Certainly everything that's, here in the continental United States is a big part of the focus. It always is, always will be. That has, especially what's happening with, in the heartland right now, there's a lot of congestion there after these winter storms. That if I had to say is like the number one issue that is continually crossing my desk, since I've started here. So obviously there's still a lot of work that needs to be done there, and to address. But with that, I feel like that's a very well-oiled machine. How we operate with everything here. It's how can we take our charter and really proactively support the U.S. shipper around the world. And that is, these investigations are super interesting, super exciting. The number of conversations that we're having with partner agencies here, in the government, and their eyes are just, they're in the past several years have really come to appreciate what is our charter, which is a very powerful instrument to support the economy. And it's the U.S. consumer. So so no need to draft new legislation. You got it right here. So there's a lot of people are having fun looking through our charter right now. But it's being that support system and really, again, kind of echoing what I was saying before, making maritime like the center of the conversation, the focal point, like, again, not the afterthought, which is where it commonly has been, being at the forefront of the discussions and working around it in a way, if not in the lead role, the supportive role. So,
yeah. And not being afraid to use the authorities that you have, right? You said you have everything that you need to be successful. And so that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Is there anything that we didn't cover today, or any parting thoughts before we conclude here? We really appreciate it. I understand that you are a fantastic runner. You've run all 6 world marathons out there. That's incredible.
There's 7 of them now, which completely screws up that whole situation for me. But now, yeah, they added Sydney. But yes, I've been a runner for 35 years, I guess. But yeah, I certainly don't run like I used to, but that's running to me is like breathing air. It's like part of my life. That'll never go away. But yeah, that's my moving meditation more often than not.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, hopefully that'll help you digest and go through some of these complex things that are probably going to be coming your way. But you've already made a few public comments, the chassis, the detention to merge, all these different topics. Maritime choke points are going to be probably continue to be a hot topic. All the investigations using the Foreign Shipping Practices Act. There's a lot. There's a lot that has already been kind of ongoing, and there's a lot coming, I'm sure. So I so appreciate getting to know you a little bit more and letting the listeners get to know you and where your experience lies and where that might inform where you go with the agency. I'm very hopeful. I think you're going to do a fantastic job, and I really appreciate you sitting down with me today.
You're the best. Thank you, Lauren.
Thank you so much. Chairman DiBella, thank you again for the conversation and for sharing your perspective at the beginning of your tenure as chair. For those listening, whether you're in the industry, in government, or part of the career staff at the Commission, leadership transitions provide important context. They give insight into how the agency may approach its work, how it engages with stakeholders, and how it balances its domestic and international responsibilities. The Federal Maritime Commission plays such a central role in ensuring fair and reliable ocean transportation for U.S. importers, exporters, and ultimately consumers. Because as you know, ocean shipping moves the world. If you like this episode, be sure to follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Want to go deeper on these topics or bring this kind of insight to your team? Visit themaritimeprofessor.com to explore corporate trainings, tailored briefings, and on-demand webinars, all designed to make complex maritime regulations practical and easy to understand. And if your organization needs help navigating the legal or strategic side of ocean shipping, head over to Squall Strategies. That's where I provide consulting services, regulatory guidance, legal and policy support for clients working everywhere in the global ocean supply chain. As always, this podcast is for educational purposes only and should not be considered legal advice. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. Until next time, I'm Lauren Began, the Maritime Professor, and you've just listened to By Land and by Sea. See you next time.